This is a part of history that should not be forgotten. Today we speak on the Maumau Uprising, a rebellion that exposed the brutality of colonial rule and helped shape Kenya's path to independence. This is the story. In the early 1950s, Kenya had been under British colonial rule for over half a century. More than 7 million acres of fertile land in the Central Highlands had been taken from African farmers and handed to European settlers. African men and women were forced to work the same lands that were once theirs for little pay, subjected to strict racial laws and paying heavy taxes that they could barely afford. Frustration grew into fury, especially among the Kikuyu people of central Kenya, who led a movement demanding two things: land and freedom. The British called them the Maumau, but among themselves, they were the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. Men and women swore secret oaths to fight until their homeland was free.
In the 1950s, Kenyan rebels known as the Maumau rose up against British colonial rule. For decades, white settlers had seized the most fertile land in Kenya, the so-called White Highlands. The Kikuyu, denied land and rights, faced poverty and forced labor. In 1952, Britain declared a state of emergency. Over 1.5 million Kikuyu were forced into barbed wire villages, and thousands were tortured, starved, or killed. At Hola Camp in 1959, guards beat 11 detainees to death in a single day. The British called it emergency measures. History remembers it as one of the darkest chapters of colonial violence in Africa.
They trained in the forests of Mount Kenya and the Aberdares, carrying homemade weapons and stolen rifles, striking at settler farms and colonial posts by night. As attacks spread and loyalist chiefs were assassinated, the colonial government panicked. In 1952, the British declared a state of emergency, sending in tens of thousands of troops, one of the largest military operations in post-war British history. By 1954, an estimated 80,000 Maumau suspects had been detained, and entire villages fenced into barbed-wired protected zones. What began as a call for justice had turned into a brutal counterinsurgency. Hundreds of thousands were herded into detention camps like Hola, Manyani, and Langata. Prisoners faced forced labor, beating, starvation, and torture. Dozens were executed. Others died from diseases and exhaustion. The British used collective punishment to break the spirit of the rebellion, but it only deepened the will to resist. By 1960, with its leaders killed or captured, including Dedan Kimathi, who had been hung in 1957, the Maumau resistance was crushed militarily, yet its moral victory is undeniable. The uprising forced Britain to confront the limits of empire and accelerated Kenya's march to independence in 1963. For decades, Britain denied any wrongdoing. But in 2013, after survivors brought a landmark lawsuit, the UK government finally admitted the use of torture and paid 19.9 million in compensation to over 5,000 Maumau veterans, a small price for the suffering inflicted under colonial rule. The Maumau uprising was not a rebellion, it was a revolution of dignity, reminding us that freedom is rarely given. It is fought for, often in silence and in the shadows of history. This
the time that World War I took place, they had already stolen over 4 million acres of land. By the time that World War II ended, they had taken 16,000 miles of land. And when we think about 16,000 miles, represents more than 10.5 million acres of land. So this is what the struggle that produced the Land and Freedom Army. And it's not, of course, and we can never take it out of history. We have to understand that there had already been a struggle. There had already been the struggle of Mikatalili and many others who fought against the British, fought against their colonial plans, fought for their land back. There had already been this struggle.